good evening from Beijing, and good morning and good afternoon to colleagues and friends in the Americans and Europe. I'm Yanxia Li, Senior Program Officer of INBAR, International Bamboo and Rattan Organization. Welcome to the INBAR webinar session, Bamboo for Climate Change Mitigation and Carbon Market Opportunities. If you are interested in bamboo carbon sequestration and how to sell carbon credits from bamboo forests and bamboo products, this is a session for you. And this session is also the second one of INBAR webinar series under the theme Bamboo for Environmental Management, which opened every Tuesday till July. So same as before, my colleague, Mr. Chim Tong Long, is with me to moderate this session today. Bamboo is one of the fast-growing plants in the world. This makes it particularly suitable as a tool for carbon sequestration. Given its fast growth rate, bamboo can be harvested regularly, creating a large number of durable products, which store carbon over several years, in addition to carbon stored in the plant itself. Industrial bamboo products, including flooring, decking, cladding, panels, and beams, are long-lasting, recyclable, and can replace a variety of emission-intensive materials, such as PVC, steel, aluminum, concrete, and hardwood. Bamboo can also be used as resources for clean and renewable energies, such as bamboo gasification, bamboo charcoal, which can substitute to the high carbon emission resources. So the session will provide a knowledge of potential carbon emission reductions through afforestation, sustainable forest management, product development, and existing and potential carbon markets for the bamboo carbon projects. So today we have four distinguished panelists. Dr. Pablo van der Lugt from Delft University and the MOSO company. He will speak about potential carbon emission reductions through afforestation, sustainable forest management, and product development. And we also have Dr. David Antonioli, CEO of Verra, also known Verified Carbon Standards, and Mrs. Amy Schmidt, Program Development Manager. So they will talk about the relevant methodologies for validation of carbon credits, project registration, and the carbon markets in terms of BCS. And we also have Professor Li Jingliang, founder and president of Beijing Institute of Green Resources. He will share the story about bamboo carbon projects that registered in China. So the session will begin with the three presentations from our panelists and following by panel discussions. If you have any questions, please write in the Q&A section. We will deliver it to the panelists. As we may not be able to address all your questions today, please just leave your email in the feedback section. And the link we will provide in the chat box in your right hand. So to begin, I would like to invite Dr. Pablo van der Lugt. Pablo is a lecturer at Delft University, as well as environmental officer for MOSO company. Pablo is also a passionate advocate of high performance bio-based materials. He is the author of 5 books on sustainable building materials and regularly published extensively popular magazines and scientific journals. Today, Pablo will share with us his study of carbon emission reductions through bamboo afforestation and management, and also its products. So Pablo, floor is yours.
Thank you, Yanxia. First, most exciting moment is already always to share the screen. So let's see if this all works well. Let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen or not yet?
Yes, it works well.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Okay, always love it when technology works. There are some videos during the presentation, so let's see if this works, but otherwise we'll just continue. So today I'll be focusing especially from the product point of view, the durable products that we developed at MOSO International, and also how that is linked to the carbon stored in those products and the forest, where they came from. So first of all, I want to make sure, because I don't have that much time, what the scope is, because we cannot cover all 1,600 bamboo species. Sorry, technology does not work. Now it works. You see the second slide, right? Of the bamboo stems.
Ja, correct.
Zien zij ook dit slechte netwerkkwaliteit? Nee. All right, so the scope of my presentation is giant bamboo species, most notably the MOSO bamboo species from China and also the guadua species from Latin America. So I just talk about giant bamboo. Then the products I talk about. I don't talk about stem products, I talk about engineered bamboo products that are densified. So these kind of products, very heavy, very strong, usable for flooring, but also for outdoor cladding and decking. So that's the focus. These are long lifespan bamboo products. To be used, for example, flooring, ceilings, very heavy traffic, semi-outdoor applications, such as the station hall in Gare du Nord in Paris, but also outdoor use, decking and cladding. So that's the scope of the products that are used. Then for the product level, we want to take into account the growth of the products, but also the manufacturing, the transport, and the use phase. So these are covered in a carbon footprint study from cradle till grave. These are based on a 2015 study that we presented at the COP21 in Paris, and an update done in 2017. In 2021, we already started collecting new data. We'll have a new update about these figures, but I'll show you the figures from 2017 for the carbon footprint on product level. Secondly, in the second part of my presentation, I'll focus from another perspective. So not from the perspective of a product, but of the perspective of 1 hectare of land. And that links even more, I think, to the second and third presentation that you will see today. This is all published in, by the way, in INBAR technical reports and this INBAR working paper. So if you want to read through the details, you can always do this later. So first, the product carbon footprint. From cradle to grave, so for the whole life cycle of the product. The first step that you have to do is measure the CO2 emissions throughout the production phase. This is called cradle to gate. And I quickly take you to the life cycle of such a durable bamboo product. So obviously we have the growing phase. During growth, CO2 is stored in the cones, and subsequently stored in the biomass and the products that you make of it. From the bamboo stems, we make strips. The strips are collected, then they can be pressed together and laminated. That's one production technology to produce all kinds of panels and flooring. But the more recent technology, or recent 5-10 years ago, is to use the less quality bamboo strips and also make high-end products out of this. So these are the rougher bamboo strips. They have to be dried first. And here you quickly see the very short the production process. You see they're located in a mold and then pressed together. Well, you can imagine that this makes for very hard and dense boards. And the more biomass you put in a product, also the more carbon is stored, because more or less 50% of the biomass in dry weight is carbon stored for the lifetime of a product. So the longer the products are used in their useful life, the longer the carbon is stored. So this can have various forms, in the forms of decks or beams like here, shown here, and there are multiple applications possible. These are just some typical examples from the Netherlands, where we have a lot of bikes. But we see many new applications coming up. This is a load spreader for the very high traffic cranes. Typically, this is done in the most dense hardwoods, and this company totally switched into this highly densified bamboo products. Then when you take a look at every product step, you can locate either an energy consumption to this, or a glue consumption, or the transport distance, because every step there is a CO2 emission. If you all add this up together, up to for this study up to the Netherlands, then you get one final number, and these are the cradle to gate figures for the production of these products. So I quickly jump to the conclusions of the results of this product carbon footprints. Well, you see that here for 4 different bamboo products, and let's look especially at the green chart, because that's the product that we are talking about, the densified bamboo. You see that especially the energy used in the factory has quite an impact on the CO2 emissions. The glue is a lot less, because the glue content is not that high. It's about, for this product, about 4 or 5% of the total product. International transport and transport in China also contribute. Then you see some negative numbers. Well, one of them is the carbon sequestration in the forest, because in China there's a net afforestation of bamboo forests in the last 1-2 decades. And the second carbon credit, as you can call it, is in case the bamboo in the end of life, so after the useful life, is used for bioenergy. Well, this is typically what happens in the Netherlands. All wood and bamboo and other bio-based materials are collected, and they are burned in specialized bioenergy plants. If that is the case, then you can say you're substituting the general energy mix in Netherlands, which is quite carbon intensive. Thus, you have you substitute the use of fossil fuels, and you have a negative carbon emission. So if you add all this up together, then you could come to a negative number. But let's not go too deep into this, because I want to move to the second part of the presentation, which looks from the perspective of 1 hectare of land reforested with bamboo. If you want to understand all the numbers, then this bamboo INBAR working paper, technical report number 35, is downloadable on the INBAR websites. I told you in 2021 we'll do an update. In this update, in the numbers you just showed, you didn't see some new technologies that we're implementing in China. These are solar panels on the factory, but also an increased use of bio-based energy. For example, bio waste through the production process, which is used for the heat, for example, the pressing and thermal modification in case of outdoor use. So in the 2021 update, we'll include these numbers. We expect them to have a positive impact on the carbon footprint. If you then look more or less at the results and compare it to other materials, and Yang-Chia already mentioned in the beginning, with bamboo, it will be very interesting to substitute non-renewable materials such as PVC and metals such as aluminium and steel, unsustainably sourced tropical hardwood, because those have a relatively high carbon footprint. Those are the products that you want to substitute. And also important to mention in these numbers, the annual yield, so the growing speed of bamboo, which is a big plus, is not included. So compared to many softwood species and hardwood species, those 2 giant bamboo species I mentioned, the MOSO species from China and the guarua from Latin America, in terms of cubic meters of material that you can produce, so really semi-finished material such as this, they have a higher yield, a higher annual yield. This is not included in those carbon footprint numbers. However, there are a big plus, because in the same time frame you can produce more products, more and fulfill more applications, in this case with the giant bamboo. For example, the guadua, more than double the biomass and the annual yield of hardwood species like Maranti, or a typical softwood species growing in the same conditions as MOSO bamboo in China, Chinese fir. Then the second part of the presentation, which focuses on the possible bamboo carbon sequestration on a land level. And this is very interesting, because bamboo, of course, as many people know, some bamboo species are very suitable for reforestation, especially in difficult circumstances. So degraded land, where you need a pioneering species to first bring up the water table and bind the ground. Well, some bamboo species are very suitable for that. In China, the last, well, as you can see from this map from FAO, from 1990, there has been a net reforestation. This certainly is not only bamboo, but a small part of it is bamboo. And we have seen since 2004, or at the beginning of this millennium, that there is around a 5% increase in bamboo forest each year in China. So this is an active additional CO2 pool, because this is done mostly on grassland. The things that I'm going to present right now are also, as I mentioned before, published in this INBAR working paper, which is also available free for download on the INBAR website. There are three pools when you look at the baseline situation of a grassland and then reforestation with a bamboo forest. One is the carbon stored in the ecosystem, so in the leaves, in the stems, but also in the soil and the roots of the bamboo ecosystem. So that's number one. Then when you produce products, the yield is used to produce durable products that I just presented in the first part of the presentation. Then you can imagine this is a temporary carbon store, because half of the weight is more or less of this product is stored carbon. More or less for this kind of product, which is quite heavy, you can say that 1 cubic meter of this product stores 1.6 tons of CO2 for the lifetime of the product. So the longer the product is in action, is in use, the longer the carbon will be locked. So if you recycle it again to another board or another beam or particle board, then the CO2 is locked for even longer. This pool is called the in terminology, in IPCC terminology, is the harvested wood products pool. Bamboo is similar to wood in that it contains half carbon. Then when you use this product to replace carbon-intensive materials, such as aluminium and PVC, for example, in a window frame, then you have a product displacement. So you avoid the CO2 emissions that otherwise would have emitted. This third mechanism, product displacement, has a very general figure of 1.5 tons of CO2 avoided per ton of harvested wood product or harvested bamboo product being used. So this only applies when you're really replacing abiotic or non-renewable materials. For example, decking out of PVC, replacing it for bamboo decking. So if you add these three numbers up, you can see what's the potential carbon reduction factor. Well, I know you're not going to read this, but the summary of this, and this comes from the report, is that in general, in the ecosystem, bamboo absorbs less CO2, has less biomass and less CO2 in the soil and in the root system and in the biomass compared to trees and plantation systems. But there's a catch to this. Because of the fast growth of bamboo, the net flux, because of the fast growth per year of carbon being stored by the bamboo, in case it's harvested every year again to produce into durable products, then you have an additional carbon pool which can be significant. And that's directly linked to the annual yield I was just talking about. So the total ecosystem carbon is lower, but the total carbon in the durable products pool over a lifetime of 30 years, we have assumed in the report, is actually higher. I jumped to the conclusions of the reports, the INBAR report that I just mentioned. You have these three mechanisms. So number one, and here on this graph, you see a comparison of 1 hectare of land reforested with guadua or with MOSO bamboo from China in a managed plantation. Also one version which is unmanaged, and comparing it with a typical Chinese fir plantation. This is based on the work by Yannick Kool of INBAR, who also made an extensive presentation about this. And it's interesting to compare with this Chinese fir because it grows in the same circumstances as the MOSO bamboo. So that makes an interesting comparison. So then if you look at those three carbon pools, one, the total ecosystem carbon is the blue bar in the charts. You directly see that in the Chinese fir has a higher carbon storage, carbon pool in the ecosystem, so in the forest itself. And it's a little bit lower for guadua and MOSO. You also directly see that when the plantation is unmanaged, then bamboo has a quite low carbon sequestration in the ecosystem. Then the second pool, and that's the harvested wood or bamboo products pool. Assuming a 30-year lifespan and assuming an annual harvest of 20-25% of the mature culms, then you come to a total pool that you can see on the orange graph. And because guadua is the biggest biomass production, it has the biggest carbon sequestration in the durable products pool. 135 for MOSO, it's 30 tons of carbon per hectare. And you see for Chinese fir, it's only 30 tons of carbon per hectare. Then the third potential reduction, that is when you use those products to replace abiotic materials. So that is not always the case, but if you do replace abiotic materials, you have a third emission reduction, and that's the gray bar. Because of the high annual yield, also here you're replacing and displacing more carbon intensive materials, and that's why it also has a relatively high number for the guadua, a little bit lower for the MOSO bamboo, which grows has a little bit less biomass, and the lowest for the Chinese fir. Mind here that the unmanaged plantation doesn't give any products. And you also see very clearly here that when you manage a bamboo plantation, it grows faster and that there's also more carbon stored in the plantation itself. So it's very wise to bring bamboo under management. From economic point of view to make these kind of products, but also from carbon storage and emission reduction point of view. So if you turn those numbers, here they are in carbon, well, from carbon to CO2, it's 3.67. Then you can come to some very quick conclusions that if you reforest, you can have more than 1,000 tons of CO2 being stored or avoided if you use giant bamboo species. Very important again to stress, bring the bamboo under management because then it has most use for value addition but also for carbon storage. If you then look at our current climate policies that are also put up in the Paris Agreement, then we can see that the total ecosystem carbon that's being acknowledged in NDCs, the national determined contributions of countries, has a high potential, but the harvested wood products or the harvested bamboo products are not always included. Interesting pool to look at for the future, and the displacement factor is not yet included in national methodologies. So this also shows the value of more voluntary schemes, which David is going to talk about in a second, and also I believe about the possibility to include bamboo. So I think bamboo is already covered in number one, but David, I hope you touch upon the question, is the harvested bamboo products pool also being potentially covered in the new bamboo methodologies for the verified carbon standard that you're developing? Because that's, of course, very interesting, and we see more and more companies that not only look at the voluntary or the mandatory schemes, but also at the voluntary schemes. And we see quite some companies struggling with this. I know Ecoplant Bamboo has done in Nicaragua the first verified carbon standard crediting, but we have companies such as Bamboo Logic in the Netherlands who also want to do this for their bamboo plantations in Southern Europe. And they're still struggling to overcome the certification costs, understand the methodology, etc. The final thing I quickly want to mention, and then I'm finished with this contribution. It's interesting to look at the various perspectives of the products, right? I just mentioned from 1 hectare of land reforested. You can look at it from a product angle, but you can also look at it from a whole building angle. So this is a building just put up in the Netherlands. It's completely made the bearing structure out of wood and covered with bamboo at the interior. So all the flooring and the walls and the doors that you see here are from bamboo. If you see this as a massive carbon store, including the wood where it's made of cross-laminated timber, CLT, then you can see this as a huge carbon pool. And in this application, typically, especially for the bearing structure, concrete would have been used. And maybe for the flooring, PVC flooring would have been used. So if you look at it from that perspective, this building with features 2,500 cubic meters of wood and bamboo locks 3,000 tons of CO2 and also avoids 2,000 to maybe even 4,000 tons of CO2. 4,000 because the bamboo is a lot heavier than the wood. From a company's perspective, as MOSO, we are selling to different kind of projects 16,000 cubic meters of bamboo per year. If you also imagine the amount of carbon that is locked in these materials, and also if you're substituting abiotic materials, the CO2 emissions that we're avoiding, then you have quite a significant CO2 benefit. I know not all of these would be covered under IPCC methodologies, but these are real CO2 stores, especially in the product itself. Which are interesting to take into account. Maybe in a more voluntary way, I don't know, but it's good to have also this perspective in mind. I think this wraps it up. A lot of information, a lot can be found back in the reports I just mentioned. Thank you all. I can't say bring up the questions because that doesn't work here, but feel free to put the questions on the chat, and we'll hear from Long and Chia when we can answer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. It's a very comprehensive presentation that touches the 3 carbon pools from the bamboo ecosystems and harvested bamboo and products, and also the replacement to the high emission materials. So the 3 carbon pools from bamboo. And Pablo also touches the point that the harvesting practice makes it bamboo can store more carbon in its products. So that that's implication to the sustainable management of bamboo resources, and that also give us implications on which we produce more durable and long lifespan products that can store the carbon in a longer term. And also thank Pablo to pick up the point of the needs for the methodologies and for the carbon projects from bamboo forest. So that's what we are going to have the second presentation. Our Dr. David Antonioli from VCS. So David graduated from environmental policy and international development from the Kennedy School of Government and Harvard University. He has been working for more than 25 years in climate change area. He is also a world-renowned expert on climate change. David has served as the Chief Executive Officer of Verra since 2008, and also Miss Amy Smith, the program development manager of VCS, will join David to give us a presentation of the global carbon market and the project development and the registration process. So David, please, and Amy, please, over to you.
Great, thank you very much for the invitation to speak. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with everybody. I've got my screen on my presentation on the screen. Please, can you confirm that you can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much again. Yeah, and it's a great presentation by Pablo, and it's exciting to be here. You know, what we'll try to do between Amy and I is try to talk a little bit about what this could look like from a standards perspective and how you could actually generate carbon credits from a bamboo plantation, and where those pools would be accounted for. I'm going to present the first part of our presentation, which is more general and high level about where we see carbon markets going and just some introduction into what our rules look like. And then Amy will take you down deeper into the deeper understanding of how our programs work, and in particular, how what a methodology might look like for the plantations of bamboo. So just quickly as an overview, Verra, we're an organization, we're dedicated to developing standards for a sustainable future, and we develop a number of different standards programs or frameworks, if you will, across a number of different social and environmental challenges that we face as a society. You see them all here on the screen. The one that we're going to talk about today is the Verified Carbon Standard, the VCS program, which, as you know, is the most widely used greenhouse gas crediting program in the world's in the voluntary markets around the world. And so this graph is from the ecosystem marketplace, and it shows the someone's on mute. If someone can mute their phone, there's a little bit of background noise. Thank you. So you'll see here some of the volumes that have been transacted in 2018 as set out by the ecosystem marketplace. And you can see there that the VCUs, what we issue, verified carbon units, either by themselves or along with another standard we manage, the climate, community, and biodiversity standards, together constitute a large portion of the credits being sold on the voluntary market. And then the one I wanted to share this slide in particular, because what we are seeing in the marketplace is that there's an increased interest in credits from land-based activities. And so this graph is just a number of issuances of verified carbon unit issuances that the VCS program has made over the course of the last 11 years since we started to operate. And I think the critical year here is to look at 2016, where the number of VCUs from land-based credits, or NCS, we call them here, natural climate solutions, exceeded the credits from non-natural climate solutions. So most of the time in the early days of the market, the majority of the credits in our system came from industrial or energy applications. So renewable energy projects, landfill gas projects, or projects that captured industrial emissions like HFCs or nitrous oxides. And over time, that has changed. And what we're seeing is that there's an increased interest and a potential for driving finance to activities that operate in the land-based sector, again, natural climate solutions as they're known. And so what we're seeing is that there's a greater interest now in a variety of different kinds of projects. So conservation or forest conservation projects, REDD, are the first kinds of projects that got off the ground under our system. And we're now starting to see quite a bit of interest in new kinds of, natural climate solutions, NCS, mostly relating to removals and restoration. Obviously, that's where the bamboo plantations would fall under. So there's a lot of interest in reforestation activities. There's a lot of interest in blue carbon as well, agriculture and grasslands. So I guess the point of this particular slide is just to illustrate that the voluntary carbon markets are really seem to be shifting in terms of their focus to focus on natural climate solutions, because they bring not only carbon emissions, but they can also do that at scale, but they also provide, in many cases, a lot of very important sustainable development benefits like jobs and benefits for communities, biodiversity conservation, etc. With that in mind, I wanted to kind of move over to the greenhouse gas program that we manage. And I'll introduce this, but I'll let Amy take over. But this is what our greenhouse gas program looks like, and what most greenhouse gas programs look like. And it's worth to say that what I'm about to describe here applies both to the voluntary markets, but also to compliance markets or regulated markets. These are the basic principles of what any market requires if it's going to accept a greenhouse gas credit. So at the center of this diagram is the core of what we manage, the VCS standard. And those are essentially the core or the basic rules that set out what the unit that we issue, the verified carbon unit, represents. So this includes elements like the credit has to be additional, it has to be audited by an independent party, it has to be listed on a registry, it has to be made with conservative estimates. All those kinds of things are basic requirements that we set out. And then the three bits around the diagram, independent auditing, the accounting methodologies, and the registry system, are the programmatic elements of our program. So I mentioned that one of the key requirements in the VCS standard is that projects or credits have to be audited by an independent third party. So of course, that means that we have to figure out who can audit under our program, what kind of accreditation they need, what kind of oversight we have, and what sort of oversight we have over the work that they do. So that's all about how we ensure that there's independent auditing for the work that we do. Our registry system is where we list all projects with all of the information, all of the reports, so that anybody can look at that registry system and understand what the details are behind a project. And on the top left of the diagram are the accounting methodologies. And this is where you would potentially see the development of a bamboo methodology that would look at the details of what kinds of data you need to gather for a project that's planting bamboo. And as you can imagine, these accounting methodologies are very different. So an accounting methodology for a landfill gas project is going to be very different than an accounting methodology for a renewable energy project, and of course one for a bamboo plant. So it sets out the kinds of parameters and data that you need to gather to be able to demonstrate that you've reduced an emission of CO2 equivalent. And critically, the methodologies also set out how you assess and how you ensure that the activity is going to be additional. So without getting too far deeper into this, I'm going to pass it over to Amy, who can walk us through kind of the details and what's behind these methodologies. But Amy, I'll just flip the slides for you. Just tell me when to go ahead.
Okay, thanks, David, and thank you to INBAR for having us on here to talk about this important work. So yeah, David, you can go to the next slide if you want. As David mentioned, I'll be talking a little bit about methodologies and what can be included in methodologies for land use projects under the VCS program. So Right now, we do have a number of different forestry methodologies that are approved in some of the categories that David walked through, including reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation for conservation, improved forest management, and afforestation and reforestation activities. So we have a number of existing forestry methodologies, and these could be used for bamboo forests where the bamboo forest meets an internationally accepted definition of a forest, but none of them are specific to bamboo forests. And so under these, since they aren't specific, they may not include certain activities that are particularly important for managing a bamboo forest, or include carbon pools that are, you know, kind of most significant for bamboo forests if they're different from other types of terrestrial forests. But under the VCS program, we have a number of these approved forestry methodologies, and also projects may use the afforestation and reforestation methodologies that have been approved under the CDM. And the couple of bamboo projects that have successfully registered under the VCS program are using those afforestation and reforestation methodologies. So to take a brief step back and think kind of about the program as a whole and what we do to ensure that all land use projects are done well and just safeguards for land use projects, we have a few different things that I'll talk through. So these are things that all projects, regardless of the methodology that they're using, need to follow. The first is the VCS AFFLU non-permanence risk tool. So with any land use project, there is an inherent risk that the carbon stock on the ground could be lost through a loss event like a fire or through drought, something like that. And so under the VCS program and under most other voluntary and compliance greenhouse gas programs, there are mechanisms to ensure that any credits issued from those projects are permanent and represent a permanent emission reduction or removal. And under VCS, we do this through a non-permanence risk buffer. So projects are required to assess their risk of having a loss event over a 100-year time frame, and contribute a certain percentage of the credits that they would have earned to the non-permanence risk buffer. And in the case of the project having a loss event where they lose carbon stocks on the ground, the credits that are in kind of this buffer reserve can be used to account for that loss. So any credits issued from land use projects can be guaranteed to always represent kind of a permanent emission reduction or removal. And so any project using VCS, any land use project, is required to assess their risk and contribute a certain amount of their credits to this risk pool. Another important concept that we have is what we call the long-term average carbon stock. And this comes into play where a forestry project includes harvesting. So obviously, if you plant bamboo, you know, you're reforesting with bamboo, and then you subsequently harvest it, you're starting to gain carbon stock in the bamboo, and then it's cut down and used in wood products, or potentially there's, you know, some loss from the total harvest yield from the standing carbon stock. And so in forestry, especially since there's kind of a longer rotation age than with bamboo, there's this idea of a project that includes harvesting needs to account for any carbon loss from the harvest, and they have essentially a cap on the number of credits that they can issue based on this long-term average of the greenhouse gas benefit from the activity. And again, this is a safeguard to ensure that any credits issued from the projects actually represent real emission reductions or removals on the ground. And finally, one thing that I wanted to mention was we allow a few different ways that projects can be designed. And one of those ways is to have a grouped project. And this allows multiple sites where activities are occurring to be bundled together in one project. So if you have a number of smallholders or relatively small areas of activity, they can be kind of added together and bundled together into one project where each individual landowner doesn't need to go through a separate project development and assessment process, which can, for kind of small scale activities, can be comparatively costly. But when a number of kind of small scale activities are bundled together, then the cost can be reduced for each site of the activity. David, could you go to the next slide, please? So digging down into what a methodology actually is now. So as David mentioned, the methodology sets out a number of different, very important kind of aspects of what a project needs to do. And so I'll walk through each of these briefly to give you an idea of what goes into a methodology and how a methodology needs to be used by the project. So the first is the applicability conditions. So these set out the conditions that the methodology can be used under. So in certain cases, it may be the specific activities that are being done or specific types of an ecosystem that the activities could be done on, or in certain cases where the methodology may not apply. And so this is really important because, as David mentioned, the methodologies kind of set out a roadmap for how projects actually quantify their emission reductions and removals and their total greenhouse gas benefit. And so we need to be certain that the methodology is doing that accurately for the type of activity that's being conducted. The next concept that I'll talk about is the project boundary. And so this doesn't necessarily mean kind of the geographic boundary of the project or the area that the project is conducted on the land. What we mean by this is the carbon pools and stocks. So for example, above ground biomass, that projects are required to measure and assess and include within kind of their quantification, and also the greenhouse gases for emissions that projects are required to quantify. So for example, in a conservation project, quantifying the reduction of CO2 from conserving a forest versus cutting it down. And so within the project boundary, also for forestry projects in general, we allow harvested wood products to be included in certain cases. And so these can be either medium or long-term wood products. So under our program, long-term wood products are those that have a lifetime beyond 100 years, and medium-term wood products have a lifetime within, I think, 30 to 100 years. And there are slightly different kind of methods to quantify the carbon stored in those wood products based on which category it falls into. The next concept is the baseline scenario, and essentially this is what would happen in the absence of the project activity. So for an afforestation, reforestation project, in many cases, it's kind of a continuation of the land use before planting began. And depending on other types of projects, it could be other things. But it's very important to be able to determine what this baseline scenario is, so a comparison can be made from what's happening under the project scenario and the emission reductions or removals that are occurring there with what would have happened in the absence of the project. Additionality is also a very important component of the project. It essentially is a test to be able to demonstrate that the project would not have occurred in the absence of carbon finance. So this is important in order to be able to issue either voluntary or compliance carbon credits under both the VCS program and most, if not all, other programs. And essentially because these carbon credits will be used to claim offsets for emissions that occurred, it's important that all projects demonstrate that they are actually kind of happening in addition to what would happen in a business as usual scenario. And finally, the methodology sets out procedures and equations for how the emission reductions and removals are quantified and how projects are required to monitor changes in carbon stocks or the greenhouse gas fluxes from the project to actually be able to accurately state the greenhouse gas benefit of the project and issue carbon credits from that. And so this is kind of the main pieces, or these are the main pieces of a methodology. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, we have a number of forestry methodologies that have been approved and that may be technically applicable to bamboo projects. But as of right now, we don't have any methodologies that are specific to activities in bamboo forests, which may be just more specific or have kind of a better level of accuracy for the particular activities that are conducted with bamboo or kind of the specific carbon pools that may be most of interest. So that's where I'll end. David, I think there's one more slide if you want to go there. Oh, just quickly to go through the methodology approval process. So as I mentioned, right now we have a number of forestry methodologies, but none specific to bamboo. If a bamboo methodology were to be developed, it would need to go through the VCS methodology approval process, which consists of a few different steps. The first is a concept note, which is kind of an early stage review by Verra, where we review the concept and can approve it to move forward with the process. So a concept note just sets out kind of the general idea of the methodology and certain key components of interest that we want to be able to provide input on at an early stage. Then a developer of a methodology would actually draft the full methodology and set out the key components that I just walked through within our methodology documentation and the specific requirements for that. Once that's done, the methodology developer would submit it to Verra, and Verra staff would conduct an in-depth review of the methodology to ensure that it meets our methodology requirements. There's then a 30-day stakeholder consultation where the methodology is posted publicly on our website, and members of the public can provide input or comments that need to be taken into account. The next step would be a VVB assessment. So as David was mentioning, for projects, they all have to be assessed by this independent third-party auditor, and the same is true for our methodologies. So an independent third-party auditor will assess the methodology to ensure that it's technically sound and meets all of our rules and requirements. And then finally, once that is complete, Verra will conduct a brief final review and approve the methodology for use. So any new methodology would need to go through this process to be approved under the VCS program. And next slide. Yeah, so I'll end there. David, if you have anything else to say, please do so, but thank you all, and we look forward to your questions.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and we'll pass it back to you guys, and to finish it off, I'm happy to take the questions at the end. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, David and Amy. A very detailed and fabulous presentation that tell us how the VCS works and the component of accounting methodologies, and also the process for approving VCS methodologies. And from the presentation, I'm happy to see there's more forestry and agricultural projects that enter into the voluntary markets, because this can bring the biodiversity conservation and job creation and livelihood improvement for the smallholders. Thank you very much, David and Amy. I I found there's many questions to you, so we will deal that during the Q&A session. So now I would like to invite our final presenter, Professor Li Jinliang. Professor Li is the founder and president of Beijing Institute of Green Resources. He's also the executive president and chief engineer of Chinese Institute of Green Carbon and former chief engineer and program directors of China Green Carbon Foundation. Professor Li has more than 20 years experience in forest production, scientific research, green development, and forest carbon projects development. Professor Li has co-developed 4 methodologies for forestry CCER project. That's the Chinese certified emission reduction projects. So that include methodologies for bamboo afforestation and bamboo management carbon projects. He has also developed the first forestry project and bamboo project under CCER scheme, and more than 40 forest carbon projects that based on international and national carbon standards. And today, Professor Li will share us the Chinese experience, how this bamboo carbon projects registered and operated. So please, Professor Li, over to you.
Thank you, yes, thank you, INBAR. Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, we already put you up there.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. It's my great honor to be here to share development and trading experience of Chinese bamboo carbon credits. Well, I will give my speech as the following 3 parts: background of the bamboo forest in China; 2, bamboo forest carbon project practice in China; 3, prospect and bamboo forest carbon credits. In the first place, I will show the background of bamboo resources in China. What you know, China is a kingdom of bamboo. In China, bamboo forest area is more than 6 million hectares, about 20% of the entire world, with more than 500 bamboo species. About 8 million people working for bamboo sector, and bamboo products share more than 50% of global market. And more than 2,000 bamboo products developed in China, such as handicraft, music instrument, mat, furniture, bamboo charcoal, pulp and paper, bamboo fiber, clothes, and so on. In the second place, I will discuss bamboo forest carbon methodology and projects in China. What you know, methodology is a guidance for methods used to determine project baseline, demonstrate additionality, calculate emission reductions, and develop monitoring plan, and so on. Therefore, methodology is a ruler of the development and certification of the forest carbon credits. Up to now, Chinese government have approved for forest carbon project methodology, CCER. CCER means Chinese certified emission reduction. What do you know? They are methodology for CCER, CCER afforestation, methodology for CCER forest management, methodology for CCER bamboo afforestation, and methodology for CCER bamboo forest management. In order to help other countries with bamboo to develop bamboo carbon credits, our expert are working together to transform the CCER bamboo methodology to VCS methodologies. Once the VCS bamboo methodology is approved, people can develop and trade bamboo carbon credits in the other countries. Next, I will share the bamboo carbon project develop process and trading process. We can see how to develop forest carbon projects in China from the chart based on our experience in forest carbon project. The development of forest carbon project is divided into 7 steps, namely project design, project validation, project registration, project implementation, and project monitoring, project verification, and assurance. First step, project design. Based on the preliminary evaluation of the project owner or advisor calculate emission reduction. Develop the project design document (PDD) and prepare the necessary supporting documents for the project validation. Second step, project validation. VVB, validation and verification body, should carry out validation. As for qualified bamboo carbon project, VVB will issue positive validation report. At present, there are 6 VVBs for the CCER forest carbon projects in China. Third step, project registration. After project validation, the project owner should submit the application material for project registration to National Registry, MEE. Registration entrusts experts to carry out evaluation, examine the application for achievable feeling of the project according to the opinion of the experts, and put the qualified project and registry. Fourth step, project implementation. The project owner should carry out afforestation or forest management activities according to the requirements of PDD, select methodology and operation design or forest management plan. This step is very important relating to the success of project as well as the level of the carbon credits output. Fifth step, project monitoring. The project owner or consulting organization should implement of the project monitoring activities according to the PDD and monitoring plan, measure the actual carbon sink amount of the project, calculate the emission reduction, prepare the project monitoring report, and prepare supporting documents required for the verification and issuance of CCER. Sixth step, project verification. Emission reduction should be independently verified by VVB. For qualified projects, VVB should issue the verification report. 7 steps, CCER assurance. The project owner should submit application material for CCER assurance to the National Registry. The assessment should be carried out by experts entrusted by authority registry. Review the application material of the project emission reduction for insurance according to expert opinion. They issue CCER for project meeting the requirement. After issue the forest carbon or bamboo carbon credits, CCER, the carbon credits should be traded on carbon exchange registered by the National Climate Change Authority. for emission reduction performance by key emitters, emission control organization or companies, or for relevant organizations to carry out voluntary emission reduction activities such as carbon neutral and carbon offset, so as to fulfill the CSR and social responsibility and build a great image. In addition, CCER to offset carbon emissions should be retired in the national registry after transition is complete. What you know, the forest and bamboo carbon credits price is about $2 or $5 per CCER or CO2, ton of CO2. This is about the first CCER forest carbon project in China, Guangdong Changlong afforestation carbon credit carbon project registered in 2014. According to the PDD, the project with nearly 900 hectares in 20 years will produce about 350,000 tons of carbon credits. According to the methodology above project development process, our expert team complete the development of the project and obtain the approval document of the project registration and CCER issuance of first moratorium period. The picture shows approval document issued by the government in DRC. While you know the first CCER for the carbon trade in China was made in 2014, you see CLAP project owner is Guangzhou Cuifeng Company, Verra is Yuede Group, a part carbon trade company in Guangdong. The carbon price is RMB 20 Chinese yuan per credit or CCER. The exchange platform is on Guangzhou Carbon Emission Exchange. The project is of the great significance to realize the first CCER for its carbon trade and use it for emission reduction performance. Covered or CCER for its carbon process of development and trading, and the project provides the project case, project experience, example for ecology value realization. Now I will share Chinese first CCER bamboo afforestation carbon projects in China. Tongshan County of Hubei Province. Tongshan Bamboo Carbon Project was developed by our group based on methodology for CCER bamboo afforestation carbon projects. About 700 hectares of MOSO bamboo and common bamboo species in South China were planted in 2015. The counting period is 20 years. According to PDD, more than 130,000 of tons of CCER may be produced in future 20 years. That is about 190 tons of CCER credits per hectare. There is no CCER issued for this project because the first moratorium period had not been reached. In the November of the 2015, the Tongshan Bamboo project was approved by government in DRC, and this is a registration approval document issued by the government. The project is very important. As first bamboo carbon project register, it employed the role to develop CCER bamboo carbon projects and provide project case and experience for new bamboo projects. Next, I will share first FFCER bamboo forest management project in China. FFCER means Fujian Forestry Certified Emission Reduction. Is the innovation of CCER in Fujian carbon trading pilot market. The owner of CCER project should be enterprise. And FFCER project handles this requirement. Shunchang Bamboo Forest Management project was developed based on methodology for CCER bamboo forest management. This project was registered and issued by Fujian Province Department of Ecological Environment in 2019, and about 2,300 hectares of bamboo forests have been good managed. And about 250,000 tons of the FFCER credits will be produced in 30 years of accounting period. In the first monetary period, about 120,000 tons of FFCER was verified and issued. Among them, about 70,000 tons of carbon credits have been sold to Fujian Emission Control Enterprise, Zhishan Chemical Company, for the purpose of the fulfill emission reduction obligation. The transaction volume is more than 1.2 million Chinese yuan, and the carbon price is 18 Chinese yuan per FFCER credit. This is about Chinese first bamboo afforestation carbon project, Lin'an Bamboo Carbon project, pilot project. This is a project that was funded by China Green Carbon Foundation. And this, according to the validation report, about 1,000 tons of carbon credits will be produced in 20 years. And this carbon credit was bought by Alibaba company, and the carbon price is 18 yuan per carbon credits. This is about anti-CCER bamboo forest management carbon credits in Zhejiang province. This project and development based on the methodology for CCER bamboo forest management. And in the 30 years, the project will be produced about 250,000 tons of carbon credits. The project finished the validation, and the project is entering the registry process. What do you know? Up to now, at least there are 4 CCER forest management carbon project under development. Next, I will share my opinion on prospect on bamboo for its carbon credit. There are multiple benefits from bamboo projects, such as enhance income for local farmers, improve capacity building, community engagement, biodiversity, conservation, and so on. The profit on bamboo face carbon in China ETS is very broad. The potential to develop bamboo carbon project in China, Southeast China, South China, Africa, and South Africa. The potential to develop bamboo forest management carbon projects in China. There are more potential to develop bamboo afforestation carbon project in Africa because there are more land resources, low carbon cost, and multiple benefits. Thank you. That's all about I want to share with you. Thank you, INBAR. Thank you, Yexia. Hello. Bye-bye. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Li Jinliang. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think Professor Li shared the 4 bamboo carbon projects that traded under the China's verified emission and reduction scheme. And we are happy to know there's 1.2 million Chinese yuan traded in one carbon project in
Yes.
yeah. And that's also linked to the CSR of the private sectors for offsetting their carbon emissions. And I think this also provides possibilities and possibilities of the carbon finance for the bamboo farmers, especially for the smallholders.
Yes, some problem. Yes, some problem.
Yeah. I'm trying to set me up. Okay, now it's okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I think can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the presentation also touched the point is the management of bamboo is also very key to the carbon credits during the traded periods. So thank you, Professor Li Jinliang. Now we have complete our 3 presentations, and thank you very much for our presenters, Dr. Pablo and Dr. David and Amy and Professor Li Jinliang. So now we are move to the Q&A section. So I hand over to my colleague Sloan to chair this part.
Well, good evening. Yes, I think that it's now I would like to invite all the presenters. We are online again. Please put on your video. And one of the things very interesting is we have so many questions. I think that we will not be able to address all of these questions, but I will select some of them. And I also cannot review them all because too many. So I will do it first come, first serve. And we will make it now. Probably we will extend a little bit longer. And we will answer that. The first question is probably I'm not sure. Maybe it's Pablo or someone who answers it. It's how is the carbon per hectare sequestration per hectare of bamboo forest is calculated? It depends on managed or unmanaged plantation. There are a lot of uncertainty in forestry sector carbon sequestration. Thank you. That's what is the question. Whoever willing to answer the question?
Yeah, I can start, and then probably Amy and David can, and then Professor Li Jianling can help. I think as Long, you yourself also have a lot of knowledge about this topic, so maybe you can also address at the end. I know you've done a lot of field study on this. How it was measured is really in detail explained in this INBAR working paper. Maybe Long Yangxia, you can share it on the chat because there it gives, and there are some very interesting meta studies done about ecosystem carbon storage for various bamboo species. So it really depends so much on the soil, the kind of management system, the location, the species. So what I just presented was, I just pick out the two species that are used the most for engineered wood bamboo products, but there are many other species and many other studies available, and also it depends very much on your assumptions. Amy already mentioned the 30 to 100 years for the durable products pool, if it's evaluated or not. Who can tell? I mean, these products can last more than 30 years, but if there is some kind of aesthetic change of owner and who wants another aesthetics, then it's changed. So these kind of uncertainties, so they're not a technical lifespan, could be more than 30 years, but then for some other reasons it could be displaced again for another material. So there are many uncertainties in there. But the way the graph I showed and the way it's calculated is shown in this INBAR working paper. That's my first top of head response.
Okay, thank you, Pablo. In fact, on this one, we also can have some other thing that additional to it. INBAR also developed a methodology for bamboo forest carbon sequestration monitoring that we develop it, and then it reviewed by ICCP task force. So it shares it on our manual. So this one we will not spend too much time to discuss on that. Please come back to our website and download the manual there for the guideline detail. But basically, if you do not manage the bamboo forest when it reaches to the top soil, to the top level, then by the time carbon sequestration is neutral, because the carbon sequestration is equal to almost carbon decomposition from the forest itself. By that time, it's equal. But with the sustainable forest management, you take it out, and then that we will count in the product. You can take the carbon out there. You can accept from there. Inside the bamboo forest, it grow it again. Then the carbon will be topped up in the forest, and when you take out. The second question here is, I think, for the Pablo here as well. One is that when you estimate for the bamboo forest carbon lock in durable bamboo products, for example, MOSO, you estimate it 1 hectare over 30 years is 70 tons of carbon. And then in our production, usually we spend around 40 to 45% of the bamboos make into durable products. The other rest, it's used for other purposes, mostly used for energy, burning or heating for the product drying or gasification. This is also, we use it one at renewable energy, instead of using coal heat or using electricity. Emission reduction is from gasification is around, not emission, electricity production from gasification around 1.2 kilogram of dry bamboo can generate 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. Do you think that carbon sequestration, carbon reduction from substitution of bamboo gasification can also be counted at emission reduction? And is there any methodology that they can apply for carbon sequestration in it? I think for Pablo and David and Amy as well.
Who starts first?
Yes, it's basically, they said that it's 40 to 40, around 50 to 50, 55 to 60%. It's using for burning, for heat. Only 40 to 45% make into the product. And you count that product, for example, like Gadua, it over 30 years, it's 130 tons. It's around 300 tons of bamboo, dry bamboo. And each ton of 1.2 ton, 1.2 kilogram of dry bamboo can generate 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. This electricity will substitute for grid emission. For example, in China, it is a company in China. There is no zero waste production in China. So can the energy from bamboo substitute for grid electricity? can be count at emission reduction, additionality or something, and can each any methodology that they can apply? Maybe Amy.
Yeah, I can speak to this. So in terms of using bamboo as kind of biomass to generate electricity, under the VCS program, we've recently updated the scope of the program and the type of activities that are included. And one of the things that is no longer eligible for new project development is for biomass burning. And we did this because in general, many of these projects no longer meet the additionality criteria that we set out for all projects. And so under our program currently, biomass for electricity projects are only eligible in least developed countries as defined by the UN. So that's for carbon credits, to earn carbon credits, not necessarily, saying that this activity can't be done for other reasons, of course.
Okay. By the way, Amy, there are some question for you here. When you mentioned that there is already methodology for long term and medium term for bamboo and wood product. Are the methodology already available?
Yes, so when I was mentioning that, it's that under the VCS program, we have kind of program level requirements that allow for these long-term and medium-term wood products to be included within methodologies. And a number of our existing forestry methodologies either require projects to account for their wood products or allow for them to optionally account for that. But right now there are no methodologies that really focus on kind of using bamboo, first of all, and secondly, really focusing on kind of the product that's being created from the land. It's mostly added on for where existing projects or existing forests have harvesting. They are either allowed to or required to account for some of the carbon that will end up in this wood product pool.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
I guess, Long, I would just add to that, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but, it seems to me that there are existing methodologies someone could use, but there is no methodology that would account for the full, let's call it, life cycle of the bamboo product, going from the beginning of when it's planted to when it is used in a product, and when the use of that product is replacing another more greenhouse gas intensive source of, a more greenhouse gas intensive product like steel or cement. So there may be ways to think about how you would do that by cobbling together different parts of existing methodologies. And maybe, Amy, you can talk a little bit about some of the new methodologies that we've been seeing in the system where proponents are suggesting or trying to account for, the less greenhouse gas intensive uses of products. And so that's where you would be able to think about how you could account for the benefits of using bamboo in a long-term product, but then that doesn't, using that only doesn't account for the carbon captured or the impact on the land. So if you think about the full life cycle of the bamboo product, you need to put together different methodologies or develop a new one. But maybe you can talk to that a little bit, Amy, to give people a sense of what's being done to think about what could be done for bamboo.
Sure. Yeah. So we've seen a few methodologies for producing certain types of products through a less emissions intensive process and claiming emission reductions because essentially you can demonstrate that these products produced through a different process are entering the market and they're not changing the overall demand for that type of product. So for example, we have a methodology where certain plastic types are produced through a lower emissions process, and it's assumed and they've demonstrated that these plastics can replace plastics produced through the higher emissions kind of traditional production processes. And so as David was saying, for really focusing on kind of this end product. It could be done, and it could follow kind of similar assumptions or demonstrations that have been made in those types of methodologies. But since it is using kind of a natural material, it would likely also need to meet certain safeguards requirements that we have for land-based projects, such as not converting native ecosystems and things like that.
Okay.
And maybe I can add something,
Yeah.
if you allow me. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, no, these are very good and valid points, and very important to have those in the more international methodologies adopted. The greenhouse gas emissions related to production of products is of course included in a life cycle assessment or carbon footprint, but that's on the scope of a product level. And here, yeah, I think these kind of projects are on a higher aggregate level, so that makes it sometimes difficult how to couple them together, but it's very important. Maybe, by the way, it would be interesting to hear about, I know that I saw Dr. Ting Ting Mai online. She and her university have done some concept proposals for, I think, for a Verra VCS standards and including the durable products pool, because that is an interesting pool that I think you can manage and you can measure. The substitution effects of substituting a high carbon intensity material will be difficult, although it is a real CO2 reduction, but it's not a real carbon pool. But it's good to take those into account. Before, maybe, I don't know, Long, you're the moderator, if that's a possibility for if Jafu University is still available to comment on that, about their methodology that they have submitted to Verra. The one thing that you are asking about is actually, I think, about the processing of the engineered bamboo, and then the production, the offcuts that are about 50% of the product, and how to use them effectively. Well, I can tell you that at least in the factories, all the bamboo offcuts are used for to substitute the Chinese electricity mix. So to run the machines, but especially to produce heat for the presses, but also, for example, if you want to use the product for outdoor, then you need a thermal treatment. So the heat produced is done by the offcuts. We've done in this report, which I just sent the link on through the chat, and you probably remember it along. We also did a study assuming that the total harvest of this potential bamboo plantation would be used to produce bioenergy in a bamboo gasification plant, and what would be the reduced CO2 emissions. Well, the conclusion is that's probably better than the CO2 emissions from the country electricity mix, but it's not as good as first putting a product to a durable product, converting the bamboo into a durable product. So the idea is always to do cascading, it's called. So first a high value added application throughout the lifetime, then maybe reuse it for particle board, and only then start using the bamboo for green energy. So it really depends on where you use it. So for example, in Ethiopia, it might be different. When you don't have a factory to produce these products, okay, then the offcuts could be used for a bamboo gasification plant. But the bigger CO2 reduction is if you turn as much as possible the product in a durable product.
Okay. Thank you, Pablo. Maybe we continue discussing about it before we jump to other question for Professor Li Linjiang.
Okay.
Because as you mentioned before, there is a Jafu. I cannot bring Jafu in, but there are some questions they sent it here. We have submitted a concept note titled Methodology for Improved Forest Management in Bamboo Forest in last August, and we would inform that the concept note will move forward to the next step. We mean, which means that an expected presentation and a recommendation. Therefore, I would like to add when we will move to the next step. But by the way, before the answering that question, I also would like to add one more thing in it. In Indonesia, now if they want to do a large scale bamboo plantation in separate islands, because if they calculate it, they want to do grid electricity built into the island, it costs quite a high actually, and then a lot of infrastructure development emission could be very high. So they increasing that it now they make a larger project to plant bamboo in the degraded land. And then the third part of it, they go make use a good piece of bamboo, they make into the durable product like Pablo saying. And all as a weight, they go run electricity to serve it, supply for all islands it for fish processing in that. I'm not sure, can they apply for carbon emission reduction from here for any project on that? If you have any advice, please. Thank you, Amy.
Yes, so with respect to the concept note, I would just ask that they reach out to us individually and we can take that offline. You know, we do see that development of bamboo projects is very promising and very important. So we are, you know, definitely wanting to support that under the program. But if they could just please reach out to us kind of offline from this webinar.
Okay. Yes. What is? Do you think that advisors for my second question here is advising on in Indonesia? Can they apply for any carbon emission reduction project? Can they develop any emission reduction projects there?
Yes, in Indonesia, projects are eligible. The VCS program is able to be used, you know, globally. So as long as the project is able to meet the kind of applicability conditions of an existing methodology, they're able to, you know, start with that and use that right away.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. The next one, I think we will shift to another question for Professor Lee Xinjiang. Oh, where's the Professor Lee Xinjiang?
I think it's just down. So I'll connect him. So
okay.
So we can go with other panelists, please.
Before that, we can add also here is another question here for Amy. What is the scale of bamboo project, afforestation project only? It is profitable for the farmer because the cost for development of the project take into account that there is already existing methodologies, but they need to develop the projects, and then all of the cost for monitoring and validation and on that. What scale in terms of how many tons of carbon emission reduction per year, so it is profitable?
Yeah, so it can really depend on a few different factors. In general, we don't see many projects that are below about 20,000 tons of CO2 equivalent per year for their estimated annual emissions. And depending on the specific type of project, sometimes it can be like you need to have a higher emission reduction in order to be profitable. So generally, as a project increases in complexity, the costs associated with validation and verification can also increase. So we see that like afforestation and reforestation projects are generally on the simpler end for a land use project. And so they, you know, may be profitable around that 20,000 ton range per year versus a conservation project, which generally is a bit more complex and may need a higher emission reduction potential to be really profitable.
Okay, yes, thank you very much.
I think, Long, just to be, you know, one more thing that is important to think about, you know, the development of projects. The transaction costs can be significant, especially if you have to develop all the documentation to get it registered. So one of the options that people have under the VCS program is to develop what we call standardized methodologies. And these essentially are, you know, to describe it simply, is to create a positive list. And that positive list would be something that would be determined a priori to be additional. And if you can create that positive list based on data of accepted practices or practices that are in place that are not very common, you could create a methodology that would be where the approval would be more automatic, and then your costs of validation would be greatly reduced. So that's one other option to think about when we're when a new methodology gets developed, if it can be done in a more standardized fashion, that helps to reduce the transaction costs or the cost for validation, which could be very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Dave. It's on the way in it. One there, some next question is, who are usually buy the carbon credit from volunteer standard because they are not compulsory? Which type of company is buying it product?
There are a number of companies that are buying these credits. So, I mean, there's been announcements, you've seen them in the news by companies like Microsoft and Amazon. So a lot of the tech sector is very, very engaged with the sector. And so they're making long-term commitments. In fact, some of them are making long-term commitments to be carbon neutral, or to be net zero, which means in the case of Microsoft, to drawing down atmospheric carbon. So they're looking at investing in projects that actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. Beyond the tech sector, there's a fair bit of commitment on the part of oil and gas companies who are trying to redirect their businesses. So you've seen many commitments, even after the coronavirus, the pandemic, there's continued to be commitments by companies like BP and Shell and others, Total, who've made big public statements about this. So there's some of the ones involved in the sector. And then there's, all sorts of, smaller manufacturing and service companies that are doing this. It's mostly tends to be companies in the developed world, in the US, Europe, Australia. But I do understand that there's growing interest on the part of many companies in places like China and other places that are, where your exposure to climate change is becoming a real big factor in a company's long-term viability. So there's starting to be more companies that are engaged in this.
Okay, thank you, David. By the way, I also answer to it. INBAR is also carbon neutral organization. All the carbon emission from Earth, we already offset them. Annually, we buy from some volunteer carbon standard and then offset all our emission. The next question here is for Professor Lee Jinlang. One is that based on job experience from emission reduction projects in China, can you see how farmer can benefit from the trade of bamboo carbon emissions reduction projects? How is that? And what side again? What side of the projects is suitable for the farmer? Because same thing like the probably same thing like the cost for monitoring and validation as well.
Okay. Yeah. For your question, I think farmer can get money from the carbon trade, and the farmer can get money from projects, products of project. Farmer can obtain employment opportunity and economic income from afforestation, forest management activities. Forest carbon project is very important for local farmers. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Then other one is that now it's the China Carbon Foundation is already closed, right, at the moment? Because the question is, in March, the International Civil Aviation Organization had ratified CCER for carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation. Do you think it will bring the right time to reopen the CCER market?
Okay, a good question. I have to clarify that CCER carbon market has not closed in China. Government in charge of climate change closed the CCER project registry, and issued the carbon credits in March of 2017. In my opinion, this is good about international aviation scheme. This is a good opportunity to restart the CCER project registration. This is because the International Civil Aviation Organization have incorporated part of CCER scopes into carbon carbon offsetting and the reduction scheme. And they therefore issued CCER that meet this scheme requirement. So this is a good idea to restart CCER registry. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. And other one is probably for Pablo. The question is, how much durable bamboo products the MOSO company produces? For MOSO, you produce durable bamboo products, yeah, right? And do you calculate how much carbon is locked in durable products that produced by MOSO company? And the other follow it. If the carbon locked in the durable product should be credited to the production company like MOSO, or the one who grow bamboo, or the bamboo the product user, which one should be credited or attributed to whom?
Yes, microphone on. Interesting question, Long. Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, we sell about 15,000 cubic meters or tons of bamboo each year. So I think in my presentation I showed the calculation that adds up to about 25,000 tons of CO2 being locked in the products. And if you also look at the substitution potential, if all these products would be used to replace abiotic non-renewable materials, then it can be doubled to about 50,000 tons of CO2. But the question, of course, is indeed where should these be? Well, in the current methodologies, they're not always credited, and if so, where would they be credited? And well, this is maybe I'm also curious to see what's the position of Amy and David on this, because I guess the one who is really so you could say there's the carbon stored in the forest. I can imagine that the forest owner holds these credits, but once you start selling and manufacturing and transforming those products in a new product, then the manufacturing company maybe could be eligible for those products. I mean, if they are transforming the bamboo in a product that can last more than 30 years, then most likely I can imagine it's possible that it's allocated to the manufacturer, and maybe it can be passed on in the end to a contractor or someone who is using this product in its product, in his project. In its final project, but then I assume it would be a transfer of credits. I know this is all very theoretical, it's not happening right now, but that would be my gut feeling how it would be accountable.
Okay, at a kind of the project developer, what is your point of view from David and Amy?
So I maybe Amy can add a little bit more about this, but generally this sort of things get sorted out contractually. So someone is the owner of the credit at some point, but that has to get sorted out contractually, and it depends usually who's going to transact it or who's got the underlying asset. It varies all across the world in terms of who owns the credit. But that, of course, has to be sorted out very clearly in order for the system to have any credibility. Amy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to add, in general, where we have methodologies where someone is producing a product, we don't expect kind of like a chain of custody to be followed when that product leaves like a production facility to actually like monitor that. It just gets very difficult to do very quickly. So in general, with what we see for land use projects that account for harvested wood products or for these other types of projects that produce specific types of products, is that they have a certain demonstration of how long the product will last on average in its kind of typical use. So even if the product could last for 100 years, but typically it will be used for 50 years before being replaced, that's kind of a demonstration that would be used, or that there's a conservative value applied for how much carbon is actually stored in the long term. And that helps kind of make the quantification chain of custody issues easier to follow, rather than needing to be involved in like every step of the way.
Okay, probably I think if we try to address all of these questions, maybe take too long time. We already passed 20 minutes for our schedule, so probably I will close the session today by now. And then all of the questions we will keep it here, and then keep on the email, and we will try to share with you the answer. And the video of this webinar will be recorded and uploaded in YouTube and as well as in INBAR website, and share in other INBAR media. And PPT, we will share it in INBAR website as well. So many people are about that. We will share that for audience. And if you want to have more detail for specific question, please click the link feedback and then put your question in the feedback. If you suggest something for improvement, please do it so. And then so we say goodbye to all the audience attending, and have you with you have a nice day. And would like to thank to all our presenters. Thank for Pablo for very nice presentation, detail. Thank for David and Amy, share it with so many new knowledge. We really appreciate very much. And thank Professor Linda, share our experience in China and good information there. And we look forward to collaborate with you in any other work in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye bye, Pablo.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Yeah. I will add.